Coming up, as we search the world for engineering catastrophes, a construction calamity swamps downtown Chicago.
Water blew through this hatch opening 8 or 9 feet above our heads.
In Pennsylvania, a slow-burning engineering emergency.
The entire town is gone.
An English town that's falling into the sea.
We've lost 40 meters off the back of my property.
And an international railway that hit the buffers.
We are inside the station. In that side was the hotel, but now there are nothing.
With big builds, even the smallest mistake can be a huge disaster. From miscalculations to misunderstandings, these are the massive engineering mistakes that only an expert can hope to fix. When construction goes wrong, there's a chance engineers might get lucky. But sometimes, tiny mistakes escalate into massive disasters. For this first catastrophe, we head to Chicago, a city in turmoil.
The city was officially declared a disaster zone.
This engineering error opened the floodgates on calamity.
A small crack quickly became a catastrophe.
Engineers raced against time to stem the flow of disaster. Chicago, Illinois, with more than 2.7 million people calling the Windy City home, it's the third largest in the U.S.
Chicago is a really important, big American city. It's built right on Lake Michigan and built around the Chicago River.
The Chicago River is central to the city's infrastructure. But on Monday, April 13th, 1992, its contents started showing up in some very unexpected parts of downtown, all thanks to an engineering error. Myron Maurer, COO of Merchandise Mart, woke up to the news that the basement of his iconic building was flooding.
Well, the first call came to my home about 6 o'clock saying that the boiler room had reported there was a foot of water.
Myron rushed downtown, and when he reached the boiler room an hour later, a small leak had become a gushing torrent.
Water blew through this hatch opening and actually was with such force that it went up and hit this ductwork here, which is about 8 or 9 feet above our heads.
But Myron's flooding wasn't the only case. Emergency calls were pouring in from across downtown. City officials were completely baffled. Journalist Neil Steinberg was downtown that morning.
And the first thing I saw was a phalanx of 6 police horses, 1, then 2, then 3, cantering up Wabash Avenue. So it was a very distinctive moment for me. And then I got to City Hall, and there was all this equipment parked here on Randolph Street, pumps and lights and command centers.
As residents woke, few knew that an emergency was unfolding downtown, and the source of the water remained a mystery.
So when water starts to appear in the basements of major buildings, the first question, of course, is where is it coming from?
At 9 a.m., as downtown prepared to open for business, onlookers spotted a clue, a small but unmistakable whirlpool in the Chicago River under the Kinsey Street Bridge.
The whirlpool was a giveaway because just like when you drain water out of a bathtub, if it's got one single area that the water is exiting through, you get this whirlpool building above it, and that's what was happening here.
The whirlpool was a sure sign that there was a hole in the riverbed, but that raised a question. How was the water getting from here to the basements of 30 buildings? Local historian Bruce Moffat had a good idea what was going on.
When I turned on the radio, and there were reports of all these older buildings in the loop drawing water, and no one seemed to know where it was coming from. And I thought, well, I know where. It has to be the freight tunnels. And I knew that many of these buildings they listed were all connected to the tunnel still.
In the 19th century, engineers constructed a network of service tunnels to carry cables beneath the downtown area. The 60 miles of tunnel were abandoned in the 1950s and largely forgotten, but now it seemed the Chicago River was draining into the labyrinth. Just hours after the first signs of a flood, multiple iconic buildings, including the Mercantile Exchange and Chicago Board of Trade, reported up to 12 meters of water in their basement.
Eventually, it filled through here and it came into this room. This room is about 30 feet tall, and it came just about 5 feet short of the concrete deck that you see up here with my flashlight.
Around 10 a.m., an emergency evacuation was ordered of the entire Loop District. The race was now on to stop the flood in its tracks. With the unlimited waters of Lake Michigan and the Chicago River, the flood wouldn't just run dry. Engineers needed to know what had caused the leak. The whirlpool in the river near the Kinzie Street Bridge was the biggest clue. The bridge is surrounded by a series of wooden piles.
The Kinzie Bridge has a small structure just to the side of it, and to protect it from river traffic, it's got some wooden piles that are secured in the riverbed around it.
Just 6 months before the flood, these simple wooden barriers had been replaced. Contractors positioned 37 new piles just a short distance away from their original location. They hadn't realized that the abandoned tunnels ran under the river here, almost directly beneath the new position for the wooden piles. As the piles were hammered into the riverbed, the dense clay was pushed aside, triggering a series of unfortunate events.
The wooden piles didn't actually crack the tunnels directly, but they were in such close proximity to the tunnel walls that the clay pushed up against them, and that's what cracked the tunnel.
Pressure from the displaced clay, combined with the weight of water pushing down from above, caused the crack to grow until finally the tunnel breached.
So what started out as this small crack in this tunnel, once the water started going through, resulted in a metropolis in turmoil.
With the Chicago River draining into the tunnels, city officials had a huge challenge on their hands: how to plug a leak in a riverbed.
Plugging a hole like this is not as simple as just putting your finger in it. A hole that can create a whirlpool in a river is going to need something a bit more substantial.
Engineers were fighting a battle on two fronts. First, blocking the leak from above.
And they brought out a barge with mattresses, with rock and other debris that they would toss in.
Using mattresses might seem strange, but time was critical. So engineers improvised with any materials that might slow the flow. Plugging the hole from above was only half the job. The team also had to seal the tunnel from within.
But they had these, they called them pigs. They were large, inflatable sort of bladders that they were bringing in. The Army Corps was bringing in.
Pig balloons are inflatable spheres that are used to stop the flow of materials through a pipeline. By inflating pig balloons inside the flooded tunnel, engineers successfully sealed off the damaged section.
They were pouring in aquatic concrete to sort of plug the thing, because they couldn't drain it until they plugged it.
The concrete permanently sealed the tunnel, but the flooding problem wasn't over yet.
Once they'd stemmed the flow of water, now they're still stuck with tunnels full of water. What do they do with it all? Fortunately, there's a sewer system that runs even lower, and they were able to tap into that, making tunnels between the two, and just drain the water out into the sewage system.
Now, all that remained was to remove millions of gallons of water from skyscraper basements across downtown.
So you still had these huge buildings that had basements full of water and fish. And the only thing to do at that point was to get pumping.
Pumping the city dry took days, and the repairs cost around $2 billion. To ensure that the underground tunnels could never again spread floodwaters so extensively, J.J. Madia and his team have installed watertight safety measures.
These are what we call river crossing bulkhead doors. Once we go through these doors, we are actually underneath the river. So if there was another breach due to the river water coming in, this would isolate the rest of the tunnel system from receiving the water. These doors, before you can open up a door, you need to open up the valve to make sure there's no water on the opposite side.
The flood was epic, but the Windy City hasn't suffered anything quite like it to this day.
It turned out to be a very odd kind of disaster. It was a flood where almost no one got wet, where almost no one saw water. They caused incredible damage, almost $2 billion worth.
It just goes to show in engineering that if you ignore small cracks, they can turn into big problems.
Some engineering calamities can be caused by a single mistake, oversight, or plain bad luck. But when Mother Nature unleashes her full fury, it can trigger a chain of events that lead to disaster. For this calamity, we head to the east coast of England, and a village that's teetering on the edge. When it was developed in the 1930s, builders couldn't predict the storm that was brewing.
Where you can see through the door there, that was the kitchen. It went over the edge. We were actually stood here, and we heard this great big crack.
Now, residents are desperate for an engineering solution to save their homes.
Houses falling on the beach, it's not something you see every day.
Hemsby, England. This seaside resort is famed for its picturesque beaches and cliffs overlooking the sea.
The village dates back to Viking times, when the raiders braved the brutal North Sea in search of glory. They decided that they liked it and stayed.
Over the centuries, Hemsby grew into a small town, with houses stretching more than a mile back from the coast. Most homes were built to last, with solid concrete foundations. But in the 1930s, people wanting to enjoy sea views built wooden vacation homes or chalets on the fragile cliffs. The houses lacked foundations and weren't built to withstand extreme weather. But in March 2018, the UK was hit by some of the most brutal storms on record.
It may have been spring in the UK, but a powerful cold storm blew in from Siberia. So bad it was nicknamed the Beast from the East, and it lashed the country.
In Hemsby, waves hammered the cliffs, which started to collapse. In just 2 days, the cliffs receded by over 5 meters. The storms of the Beast lasted a month. By the end, 11 meters had disappeared. Army veteran Lance Martin had only just moved into his clifftop home when the Beast arrived.
We were actually stood here, and we heard this great big crack and a rendering sound, and we looked around and it had gone. It was really scary, and you know, I grabbed hold of one of the guys that was in here and I kind of threw him towards the front door. That was my first reaction, and then I thought, why have I thrown him towards the door? Why aren't I running? This was my living room, so I had a sofa here. I had a chair there. That was the bedroom with a double bedding and a wardrobe. Where you can see through the door there, that was the kitchen, the bathroom and a wet room. And that room was 12 foot by 18 foot. And sadly, it went over the edge. And it just went with a big crash and a bang.
But the Beast wasn't done yet. Lance's home took a further beating.
Subsequently, the storm that we had knocked another 20 metres off, so we've lost 40 metres off the back of my properties.
The storms left 13 clifftop homes uninhabitable. Although the damage caused by the Beast from the East was extreme, it wasn't the first time Hemsby's cliffs had been attacked by Mother Nature. 5 years earlier, in 2013, this same stretch of coastline was pounded by a phenomenon called a storm surge, as geologist Julian Andrews recalls.
In December 2013, there was quite a big storm surge, the biggest one around here for some time. And Hemsby here, there's evidence that the dunes, certainly in places, moved back by about 10 metres or so.
For a storm surge to form, you need 3 elements: a low-pressure weather system, strong winds, and a high tide.
Strong winds push water towards the coast, while low pressure overhead sucks sea levels higher. Add in a high spring tide, and the waves crash harder and further inland. The 2013 storm surge was the largest the UK had seen for 60 years. It drastically weakened the cliffs. When the beast from the east hit 5 years later, the wooden vacation homes were doomed. Back in the 1930s, builders couldn't have foreseen our current extremes of weather. But even so, it seems an oversight to build houses with no foundations on such soft geology.
Erosion has been ongoing in this coast really since the end of the last glaciation, about 7,000 years ago, and the coast has been eroding back at quite a steady rate, roughly about 1 metre a year since that time.
The reason Hemsby's cliffs are eroding so much faster than most places is because these cliffs were formed by huge glaciers grinding down the seabed into sand, and it's this sand that now forms the entire coastline surrounding Hemsby.
This pile of sand is far from rock solid when it comes to the erosive power of the sea. Not only that, but there's another issue which compounds the problem: the direction that the cliffs face.
So these are northeasterly facing cliffs and beaches. In the winter, the big storms are coming in from the northeast, blown by northeasterly winds. So these cliffs really take the brunt of that wave energy.
Taking the soft ground, the exposed location, and the fact that houses have fallen here before, isn't the mistake to build here at all?
With Lance's home on the brink of total collapse, the local authorities issued an ultimatum: demolish it or attempt to move it with the help of local engineers.
I've been given a deadline of 1 o'clock today to try and move it forward sufficiently that the council are happy with where I've moved it to and it's no longer a danger. It's now 10:25, so I've got basically 2.5, 3 hours to achieve this.
Without a foundation holding you to the ground, you can literally pick it up and drag it like a sled somewhere else.
So what he's doing now is levelling out the ground for us so that we can start the drag forward of the building. So we need that to be as level as possible so that when we do drag it forward, we don't hit any ruts or troughs. So he's doing the best he can to get us as level as possible.
The house was not built with this move in mind, so Lance and the team have no guarantee of success. First step, prepare a flat area far from the cliff edge, where they hope to resettle his home.
We need the front door to come to about here to keep the council happy, and then I'll have a good-sized garden at the back.
Next, the engineers attach cables around the base of the building to haul it back from the edge.
Right, here we go, boys.
The structural integrity of Lance's house will be pushed to the limit.
Yeah, cracking.
Get out the way.
If it holds together, Lance might just save his home. But for some, the outcome is more harsh. Kane Fincham is a local demolition expert. He's well aware of how dramatically the cliffs have changed here.
These were built in the 1930s, and back then there was a good 100 metre, 200 metres out, you know, of sand dune. 15 years ago when I came here as a child, there were 3 tiers to it, and now there's nothing.
This chalet is too weak to be moved, so demolition is the only option.
First visit a month ago, that porch had about 2 or 3 metres ahead, a bit of a garden, and now there's nothing.
With machines crunching from above and below, in just 30 minutes, the home is reduced to a pile of wood. With so many homes falling over the edge, residents are hoping for a solution. As the saying goes, you can't hold back the tide. But with modern engineering, we can try.
One of the options that people have considered recently is what we call managed realignment. So you can make decisions to essentially let nature take its course, but guide it a little bit.
In Hemsby, work has begun on a chain of honeycomb-shaped concrete blocks, a so-called beehive barrier. The chain is designed to allow tidal waters to pass through while absorbing the impact of waves before they reach the cliffs.
Concrete barriers are ugly and expensive, but if the alternative is that people are going to lose their homes every time there's a big storm, then it's probably a price worth paying.
These honeycomb defenses might well save the coastline in the future, but for Lance, the survival of his home is in the hands of engineers.
If we can get another meter, that would be fantastic. Then I know that I'm in the safe zone. Fantastic.
Mission accomplished. Lance's home is finally safe. The question is, for how long?
Elated, I really am.
When it comes to this ongoing battle with Mother Nature, engineers will continue to innovate while repairing the oversights of the past. It's easy to see an engineering mistake when it collapses before your eyes. But when a disaster is unfolding out of sight, you might not spot it until it's too late. For this catastrophe, we head to Pennsylvania and a mining town turned wasteland.
It's incredible to think that this whole thriving community is now gone.
This mass exodus was due to an engineering error that's an ongoing problem to this day.
Nearly the entire town is gone. There were 400 or 500 buildings here, and now they're down to maybe 4 or 5.
Centralia, Pennsylvania. In 1854, this area started to grow rapidly when a railroad was built to capitalize on its mineral-rich terrain.
Pennsylvania is well known for the Appalachian Mountain Range and also the coal region, which historically was the coal mining capital of the US.
Thanks to the coal mines, Centralia and its community thrived for almost a century. Former resident Tom Dempsey recalls a good life here.
It was nice. It was a nice town to grow up in. And we had a great time here. You know, when we were kids, it was a safe place. There was approximately 2,500 people living in the town when I was a kid. And we used to play around the coal mines. We used to play around all the places that you shouldn't play is where we played.
The 2,500 residents are now gone, and Centralia is a ghost town. But these empty streets once bustled with life, thanks to the particular type of coal lying underground. Coal forms when rotting organic matter is crushed underground for millions of years. Where the ground buckled into hills or mountains, the coal was heated and compressed further. The result? Undulating seams of the hardest, cleanest burning coal on Earth, anthracite. It's also the most valuable, and almost all U.S. anthracite is found in northeast Pennsylvania.
Anthracite coal. This has less impurities and less moisture, which means it burns really easily and at the highest temperature.
This high-grade coal gave life to Centralia, but ultimately sparked its dramatic downfall. Local journalist David DeCock knows the area well and recalls how it looked in its heyday.
We're in the village of Marion Heights, Pennsylvania, which is about 8 miles from Centralia. Marion Heights looks very much like Centralia did. The houses are very much the same. They come right up to the street. There's no front yards. They were both coal mining towns. There's certainly a lot of old coal mines in and around Marion Heights.
But compared with the streets of Marion Heights, Centralia now looks very different.
This picture shows the main street through Centralia. In the fall of 1983, nearly the entire town is gone, wiped off the face of the earth.
What could wipe an entire town off the map? It all began back in May 1962, when local officials unwittingly sparked an underground fire. A fire that would make the town uninhabitable. Mining towns across America regularly dealt with their trash by using abandoned coal pits as landfills. When full, these would be set on fire, and some believe this could be what triggered Centralia's downfall.
They would let it burn for a while, then they would wash it down with water from a tanker truck, go away, everything was fine. But in 1962, this was the first year that the dump was in this location. And so they did what they did, they let it burn, thought it was out, but it was smoldering down in the lower depths of the garbage. And the fire spread from the garbage through an opening in the pit that went into this labyrinth of abandoned coal mines beneath the town. And that's how the mine fire got started.
No one knows for sure how the blaze reached the coal, but it's possible that the pit hadn't been properly lined before the fire. As the trash burned, the townsfolk didn't realize it had ignited the coal beneath it. The anthracite coal burned readily, and the fire smoldered underground. With more coal seams beside it, the blaze soon spread.
Howdy.
Geologist Dr. Cynthia Venn is heading into a nearby mine to reveal just how densely packed the seams are in this region.
What we have here is a seam of coal, the orchard vein, and you can see it's sandwiched between like a sandy shale kind of rock above and the same below. Because these veins are separated by this other rock, if you have a lot of cracks in the rock, or if you have a very thin layer of rock between the veins, then one burning vein, which gets very, very hot, can kind of heat through to the other, and so you can get this sequential sort of burning of veins if they're close enough together.
The large network of abandoned coal tunnels supplied the fire with oxygen, fueling the blaze, and the high-density coal lying beneath the town made matters worse.
Once the coal is lit, it's very hard to put out, especially as it's anthracite coal.
In 1969, engineers attempted to prevent the fire from spreading. The plan was to dig a trench through the seam in front of the burning coal, like a fire break in a forest. But the blazing coal smoldered past before they could dig deep enough. They hoped that the fire would eventually burn out, but a decade later, the coal was still smoking.
The fire was releasing noxious gases which were blowing towards the town. The answer was to drill down to the burning coal and allow these gases to escape away from the houses.
This shows the vent pipes that were installed around us here right around 1980 or 1981. And the purpose of them was to pull the fire and the deadly gases away from the town of Centralia.
99. As the fire burns, it's oxidizing the sulfur in the pyrite, and so you're getting sulfur dioxide from that. You're also getting probably carbon monoxide because it's not burning completely. There's not enough oxygen down there.
It's a real witch's brew coming out of that pipe, just of nasty stuff. Yeah.
Nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Just a few years after the vent pipes were installed, some argued that they were making things worse by feeding the fire with oxygen. So the decision was made to seal them. But the coal seam continued to burn, and pressure from noxious gases built up beneath the town. The results were disastrous. Roads began to swell and crack open, releasing toxic fumes. Remarkably, Centralia's residents continued with their daily lives, despite the disaster burning beneath them. Engineers tried again to stop the fire in its tracks.
Let's say this coal seam was on fire, you'd just dig down past that coal seam all the way around and then put some kind of a non-combustible barrier on there. And if you do that, then the coal will burn to the barrier and then quit. Then they sort of tried that early on, but they didn't finish the barrier, and when they did it a couple of times, and the one barrier, they went down and they were behind the coal. They had misjudged where the fire was.
By the late 70s, having failed to prevent the fire from spreading closer to the town, residents were warned that Centralia was unsafe. But most people stayed put until a dramatic event convinced them of a very real danger.
When coal seams burn underground, they undermine the integrity of the surface. Frighteningly, this can result in sinkholes opening up, revealing the burning coal below.
That's exactly what happened on Valentine's Day 1981, when a young Todd Domboski was exploring his grandmother's backyard.
Right now we're standing in front of the home of Todd Domboski, the young 12-year-old boy that fell into the sinkhole. Now that sinkhole was in the backyard, which it's hard to get to with all these brambles and stuff here, but it was about 30 feet back on the right. He saw a puff of steam coming out at the base of the tree, so he went over to see why. And when he got there, the ground just went out right from under him and opened up. And steam shot about 50 feet in the air.
Miraculously, the boy was hauled out by his cousin and survived.
Eventually, it attracted all the major news media in the country and the world, really. Usually a mine fire didn't cause too much attention before. But that shone the spotlight on it. And then the end result was what you see now. Everybody left.
By chance, state politicians were visiting that day and witnessed the aftermath. They insisted that the state intervene. But with the underground fire now so huge, extinguishing it was no longer a viable option.
It was Centralia, it was just finally a matter of money. What's going to cost more to dig this huge barrier and surround the coal and just buy everybody out? And so they decided to buy everybody out as a cheaper alternative. I think it was $42 million as opposed to $200 million to do that remediation operation.
The government offered residents a substantial cash sum to leave. But despite the cracking highways, noxious gases, and sudden sinkhole, many people in Centralia were still reluctant to abandon their homes.
There was an engineering study done by an engineering firm from Pittsburgh, PA, and they published a book that was passed out to every family in the town, had all these different scenarios that could happen if nothing was done with the fire. And that scared the arses off the people, I guess you could say. And a lot of them then changed their mind and left.
This engineering report quashed any rumors or opinions that could gain authority in these situations, and it revealed the hard truth of what needed to be done.
This brought the reality home to residents, and most left town. By 1991, many of Centralia's buildings were demolished, and the main highway closed. A decade later, just 21 residents remain, refusing to leave their homes. Today, more than 50 years since it began, Centralia's coal seam fire burns on. With no end in sight, experts predict that it could smolder for another 250 years. Some engineering catastrophes are the result of the smallest mistake, with consequences that no one could have foreseen. Others, however, are so obvious that you can't help wondering how on earth they happened. Like this story in northern Spain, with a train station that hit the buffers.
How could such close neighbors get it so wrong?
As engineers from Spain and France discovered, every decision, however small, can have disastrous consequences.
It sounds like something was lost in translation with this blunder.
Canfranc, a small mountain village in the north of Spain near the French border. and home to one of Europe's largest railroad stations.
Canfranc is in an extremely remote location. It's hundreds of miles away from the nearest major city.
It was a village with only 500 people, so you'd think it would be the last place that they would build such a major station.
And yet, in 1928, trains started rolling in and out of this mammoth construction. Laura Roldan is a local tour guide.
The station is 241 meters longer. There is 150 doors and 365 windows. It's a big building.
This was an astonishing feat of engineering. They built a massive station as long as 2 football pitches in the mountains, 4,000 feet above sea level.
So, why go to all this trouble?
The huge Pyrenees Mountains cut Spain off from France, but both countries wanted to open up a trade route. And what better solution to transport goods than rail?
Raymond Campo, a local journalist and historian, explains the significance of this rail line.
Canfranc station was built because here is in the middle of the Pyrenees and is the shorter way between Madrid and Paris.
France and Spain were already connected by 2 rail lines, but these went around the Pyrenees. To slash journey times between the nation's capitals, the ambitious new line would cut directly through the mountains. The project involved the building of dozens of new bridges and drilling tunnels through the mountains. Just building the track was an epic engineering feat, and it demanded an equally epic interchange. The massive Canfranc station took Spanish and French teams 5 years to construct. The opening ceremony in 1928 was a grand affair, attended by both King Alfonso of Spain and President Gaston of France. Visitors gazed in awe at the spectacular new station.
The Canfranc station building was the second biggest in Europe after Leipzig in Germany.
There was customs, there was passenger controls. On the second and third floor, there was 40 apartments for staff.
Soon after it opened, the station buzzed with life. The giant transport link was nicknamed the Titanic of the Mountains.
Here, every day, arrive around 7 or 8 trains from France.
There are many passengers, there are people who work in the train, there are many bars and the hotel. All of them is movement until 6 in the morning and to the night. The glory days here was many people taking the train from here.
But by the 1930s, just a few years after the first trains arrived, the glory days were over. Today, the station stands derelict.
We are inside the station. In this moment, the station is empty. In that side was the hotel, but now there are nothing.
Despite its initial success, Canfranc was doomed from the outset. What could have caused this grand station to rapidly fall from grace? The problem was a simple and yet fundamental engineering issue. French and Spanish trains couldn't run on each other's tracks.
Now we are in the Spanish side, and the tracks are different than the French tracks. Here, the side is about 5 feet 5. Well, this is the side of the French railway track, and it's 4 feet 8.5.
The Spanish tracks are almost 25 centimeters wider than the French, making it impossible for trains to cross from one to the other.
Today, nations work together to standardize all sorts of things: trains, planes, automobiles. But 100 years ago, this wasn't the case.
Without a standardized system, every nation and even region chose the best gauge to suit their needs.
Narrower gauge is cheaper and easier to build, both track and trains. But a wider gauge, although more expensive, can carry more weight. And a heavier or bigger locomotive equals more pulling power, more speed.
So the Spanish opted for a wider gauge. But legend has it that pulling power wasn't the only reason behind the different track width.
Spain have different railway line to Europe because they're afraid of invasion. Because in the 19th century, the French invaded Spain.
In February 1808, Napoleon turned on his ally King Carlos IV and invaded Spain. The French stayed for 5 years, leaving a bad taste in the mouths of the Spanish. Whether driven by invasion paranoia or simple practicality, Spain's track gauge decision created a huge problem at Canfranc. An issue that was too much for anyone to bear, including passengers.
Passengers arrive in this side and they have to move another train in the other side of the station. This is the train Spanish and the train French.
I was a French passenger. I just go down the train and I have to go to the Spanish side, so I have to pass into the lobby and then I have to buy the ticket here. That's the ticket office. And then I have to pass to the Spanish side because there is waiting the Spanish train. So, and we are in Spain.
Switching trains is a pain. We'd all prefer a direct journey over one with a change. But it wasn't just passengers. Every single product that crossed into France needed to change trains.
If the time and effort taken to transfer between trains wasn't enough to finish off Canfranc, there was one more fundamental issue between the two railroads: power.
We can see here that pylons, which the French train have the electricity. And in Spain, we had a steam train until 1970.
The Spanish and French railways couldn't have been more incompatible. Different gauge and different power.
So many issues made Canfranc a very unpopular transport link, and it rapidly fell out of favor with both traders and travelers. The line continued to operate with as few as 50 passengers a day until 1970, when disaster struck. Engineer Antonio Roche explains.
In 1970, an accident took place in the French side, and one of the bridges of the line collapsed. Since then, the line was cut, and this brought here a rapid decline.
The decision not to repair the bridge was the final nail in the coffin for Canfranc. In 2010, high-speed rail travel between Spain and France was introduced, using a standardized gauge. But these lines go nowhere near Canfranc. Whatever the future holds, Canfranc will always be a reminder that a standardized system is an essential part of a united world. As we continue pushing the limits of engineering, some projects will be hits, others will be misses. So long as engineers keep using their ingenuity, for every problem, there will be a fix.